Hey, it's Lynn, and today I'm coming at you with a book review of I'm a Fan by Sheena Patel, a debut novel that arrived with considerable noise, a stack of literary nominations, and a first line so blunt it practically slaps you across the face before you've even settled in. Our narrator is unnamed, as are nearly all the significant players in this book. She is a woman of color living in London, caught in the orbit of two people she has absolutely no business fixating on, and yet cannot stop. The first is a man she calls simply the man I want to be with, a married, older artist who keeps her at a precise distance. The second is the woman I'm obsessed with, a wealthy white Instagram famous influencer whom the narrator has never actually met but knows with the eerie intimacy that only sustained, compulsive, chronically online following can produce. The twist: both women are sleeping with the same man, and the narrator is fully, painfully aware of it. The novel unfolds as a series of short, titled vignettes, some no longer than a page, that move through the narrator's obsessions, grievances, and desires with restless, feverish energy. There is a boyfriend at home she freely admits she neglects. There are fleeting encounters with a man that never quite amount to what she wants them to. And there is, always, the woman on the screen. Her curated life, her inherited wealth, her effortless visibility. The book is less interested in what happens between these characters than in what the narrator thinks and feels about all of it, which is to say, it is almost entirely an exercise in self reckoning. Threading through every vignette is the narrator's acute awareness of how race, class, and gender shape the dynamics that she is trapped inside. She understands that the man's desire for her is partly aesthetic, partly racial, that she is to him a particular kind of object rather than a person with full weight. She understands that the influencer's ease is not earned, but inherited. She understands with painful clarity the precise mechanics of her own diminishment, and yet understanding none of it is enough to move her. That gap between knowing and being able to act differently is the engine that the whole novel runs on. The writing itself is extraordinary, and that is generally the first thing worth talking about in this novel. Patel writes with a raw, confrontational energy, no hedging, no cushioning, no literary throat clearing. Every sentence is purposeful and a little bit dangerous. It is the kind of prose that operates on the gut before it reaches the brain, and there are passages in this novel that are among the sharpest that I have encountered in recent debut fiction. You stop mid paragraph not because you're confused, but because you need a moment to absorb what just happened to you. The cultural commentary is equally sharp in this novel as well. The class analysis, in particular, is unsparing in the best way. The influencer is rendered not as a villain, but as a symptom, someone who has converted inherited privilege into the appearance of effortless achievement. And the narrator's relationship to her is not simple envy. It is something more entangled and more structural than that. The specific exhaustion of watching someone occupy space you were never even told you could want, and then being expected to admire them for it. Patel understands that this resentment is not petty, it is political, and she gives it the full weight that it deserves. The vignette structure also deserves credit. The short, titled chapters give the novel fragmented, scroll like quality that mirrors the experience it is describing, the way that attention splinters online, the way a thought begins as self reflection and ends somehow on someone else's profile. It is a formal choice that is genuinely clever, and it makes the reading experience disorienting in a way that feels earned. The characters, though, all of them, are relentlessly, uniformly awful, and I found that more depleting than illuminating. I want to be careful here because unlikable characters are, as I've said in many of my reviews, not a flaw in themselves, but every single person in this book operates from the same register of toxicity with zero variation. The man is a user, The influencer is oblivious. The boyfriend exists only to be wronged. Even the narrator, despite the intimacy of the first person voice, never becomes a full person whose inner thoughts surprise you. She functions primarily as a vessel for the novel's ideas rather than a character with her own emotional range. And so by the end, the relentlessness of everyone's awfulness had started to feel less like a considered artistic choice and more like a brick wall. Then there is the matter of the plot, or the matter of there being essentially none. I will happily defend the all vibes, no plot novel as a legitimate and even exhilarating mode of fiction, but even by that standard, I'm a Fan sets a record. The affair does not progress. The obsession does not evolve in any meaningful direction. The narrator begins the novel in a spiral and ends it in the same spiral. The vignette structure, which is formally very interesting, starts to work against the book once you realize that by the midpoint you have essentially already read the whole thing. Nothing shifts or breaks, and the repetitiveness of the emotional terrain eventually tips from intention into bleakness. What stayed with me most uncomfortably, though, is what I'll call the self comparison problem. And this is also where the novel touched something I think is genuinely worth sitting with and worth noting. The narrator's obsession with the influencer is framed partly as political critique and partly as a kind of compulsive self harm. She looks at this woman's extremely curated life and cannot stop looking, even as the looking hollows her out. That mechanism is recognizable to anyone who has spent any significant time on social media because the platforms, the algorithms, are specifically designed to produce it. You follow someone because their work interests you or because their life looks like a version, perhaps, of something you might want. And then at some point, you realize you have been scrolling for 40 minutes while sitting on the toilet, feeling worse about yourself in ways you cannot quite name. Social media optimizes for engagement, and there is nothing more reliably engaging than a low grade sense of inadequacy. The only real answer to that is intentionality, curating your feed around what genuinely nourishes you and being ruthless about what doesn't. But that requires resisting an architecture that is purpose built to prevent exactly that kind of resistance. Patel sees all of this clearly. And my issue, on the other hand, is that the novel ultimately circles this insight without deepening it. Naming the trap and dramatizing the trap are not the same thing. And I'm a Fan, at its least effective, confuses the two. So where does that leave me? I give I'm a Fan 2 out of 5 stars. And I say that with full acknowledgement of Patel's talent because that talent is real. The prose is remarkable, the cultural commentary is earned, and there is something genuinely urgent in what she is trying to do. But the book as a whole is undone by its own insistence on making every character irredeemable, on refusing to let anything happen, on returning to the same emotional territory so many times that the ground eventually gives way beneath you. It was compelling enough to finish, almost against my better judgment, but I closed it feeling more wrung out rather than moved. Sometimes that is the point of the book, but this time, for me, it just wasn't quite enough. And so that leads me to you. Have you read the book yet, or are you planning to? I'd love to know your thoughts down in the comment section below. And as always, thank you so much for watching. You are awesome, stay awesome, and I will see you in my next video. Goodbye.